versions of their moms. documents.
No. You're always fine.
Well, in years past, it was always zeros, ought, plus ought, carry the ought, and it's ought.
Hi. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Capitola City Council meeting tonight. We are being televised, and thank you, those of you who are watching at home. We appreciate your interest in Capitola, and we'd like to say a very healthy and happy birthday to the Chief tonight, and congratulations and many more.
Who got the cake? Anybody get the cake?
Later.
Oh, okay.
Later. So congratulations, and sorry you have to work on your birthday.
We're going to get a clown, but...
You get... Okay, may we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Norton.
Here.
Councilmember Story.
Here.
Councilmember Bottorff.
Here.
Councilmember Termini.
Here.
Mayor Harlan.
Here, will everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any staff announcements?
Madam Mayor, the one item I did want to report on is earlier this week, staff, as well as with help from several council members, conducted interviews for Community Development Director. I did want to report that I thought that the interview process went real well. We have a number of really good candidates who I'm meeting with this week and next. And with any luck, we'll be able to bring a new Community Development Director on board this spring.
Great. Have you've narrowed it down to several?
The two panels recommended 3 candidates that I should talk to and interview. I've talked to one of them. One of them I was able to contact directly after the interview, and he U-turned it just as he was getting on Highway 101 heading south, and came back and spent the night in Capitola Village, and we talked the next day, and I have meetings set up with the other 2 candidates for early next week.
Great. Good job. Are there any announcements from council members? Okay. We do not have oral communications tonight, so we're going to go right into our business, which is a mid-year report of our budget.
Madam Mayor, I want to just point out for the first time since I've been at the city, which goes back to 2008, we're doing this mid-year report and we don't have to close a budget deficit. So I think that's all a moment that we should all celebrate and appreciate, because for the first time we've been able to put together a budget, and the economic conditions or state takeaways have not negatively affected us to the point where we've had to adjust our budget down. So tonight what you'll be hearing from Tori is a great presentation summarizing where we stand, but the overall picture is one in which our budget looks fine. We do have a little bit more money than we anticipated going into this fiscal year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tori Hanna, our Finance Director.
Thank you.
Good evening. This is just a fiscal year 12-13 budget presentation. Really, the goal coming out of it is to give you an update on the fiscal activity within the city, allow you to see what's going on and if you'd like to make any changes. At the close of this meeting, the recommended action will be to authorize an additional for recruitment of a public works position, and this was part of the Measure O funding package, and approve the budget amendment for the changes that will be presented tonight. After I close with this presentation, the city manager will present the budget principles. Just a quick review of the budget timelines. The proposed budget is planned to be distributed on May 10th, and with the first presentation of the budget hearing is going to be on May 22nd. Just stepping back to the fiscal year 12-13 adopted budget to give you some idea of where we started at. We balanced the budget with a one-time sale of land at $85,000. We also had some reductions in our revenues, a $130,000 loss from the close of the Pat Cove Mobile Home Park, and the loss of the city RDA interest of $150,000. We also closed down the PERS Internal Service Fund, which was a reserve for some of the PERS payments, and we took a $180,000 credit against our bond payment this year. Some of the key transfers that we made was moving $400,000 from the internal service funds to the reserve funds to help meet our contingency and reserve goals. And council allocated $317,000 of what we labeled as discretionary items. And just to give you a review of those items, the historic budget had approximately $585,000 in those items, and the adopted had about $317,000. Of the one-time credits, $266,000 was used to cover that $317,000 of items. You might want to keep in mind that $585,000 figure, because when we go back to the end of the budget for potential projections for fiscal year 13-14, that number could be important. So in big picture general fund summary, prior to Measure O, our operating revenues increased by $101,000 and our expenditures decreased by $101,000. This excludes $152,000 for the RDA dissolution clawback. That's going to be coming out of fund balance. However, it will appear on a line in this year's budget. And then also the Measure O amounts are going to be included in the amounts that you see tonight. In addition to that, in prior budget session, we talked about allocating an additional $200,000 of fund balance to the reserves. These numbers will also include that $200,000. And again, projecting a positive fiscal year-end balance of $86,100. And just almost to reiterate that, you can see we started out with a positive fund balance of $566,000 with a transfer to reserves of $200,000, the RDA clawback. It left us with an adjusted fund balance of $213,000. So after all of our operating revenues and expenditures, we came out with $86,000 ahead, leaving us with an estimated fund balance of about $300,000 at the end of this fiscal year. In general, the largest portion of our revenues is taxes, with sales tax being over 40% of our revenues. Just to give you an idea of some of our sales tax trends, when we're doing our projections for the end of this fiscal year, we're basing it on just 1 quarter of data that we've received. As you can see, the line at the top, which is the red line, it's the higher revenues, which is reflecting the addition of a major retail store, also increased general economic performance, and you'll see it peak in the fourth quarter with the addition of Measure O. If we look at where we are today in comparison with 3 years ago, you can see just in general, due to the addition of the major retailer, our sales tax is trending higher than other years. It's 11.4% greater than the prior year, and it's 2.4% above the budget. Also, our TOT has increased by over 25%, but part of that is due to a one-time internal adjustment at one of the hotels, so that reflects $48,000 of that amount. Some of our other revenue trends, licenses and permits, you'll see is down. That's partially due to not having a major retail development project this year. In fiscal year 12, you can see that it peaked. And then we also have a potential refund coming up, which we did include in the budget, for up to maybe $70,000, which was for an adjustment in the assessment value of one of the license and permitting fees. Other revenues, when you see that number decrease in fiscal year 13, that reflects the loss of the Pat Cove rents and the RDA dissolution revenues. Just to give you an idea of where we are and what our projections look like, sales tax, $245,000 of that $366 represents Measure O monies. The TOT tax is in general better performance. And you'll see charges for services dropped by $142,000, and this is due to primarily some of the interdepartment billings and also some adjustments in grant revenues. Estimates by departments, law enforcement is the largest expenditure. And looking at 3-year trends, salaries are on track. They represent 48% of the year. We are projecting a savings, so you can see a slight decrease in that amount. And if you look at contract services, a lot of that is timing. That's for the reduction. And then in other financing sources, fiscal year 13 is lower than fiscal year 12, primarily because we're not making emergency reserve transfers from the general fund. They're primarily coming from the internal service funds. And then we have the one-time PERS adjustment to offset our pension obligation costs. If we look at expenditures by category, personnel is experiencing a reduction of $124,000. And you can see the effects of Measure O. Expenditures by department, some of the key changes is in the city attorney's office. There's been close to $100,000 added for additional litigation. For finance, we have about $67,000 more, and approximately $20,000 of that is due to cost for audits for the RDA dissolution and some of the legal fees associated with that and the tax issuance. The amounts from the RDA dissolution are helped to be offset by the $250,000 of additional revenues that we receive. You'll see the police department, the reductions are $226,000 in salary savings. That represents a vacant police officer position, overtime savings, and just in general, looking at some of the steps that some of the offices are at and fine-tuning the numbers. That $226,000 is offset by that $94,000 in estimated salary savings that we projected at the beginning of the year. Public Works has some savings due to a Safe Routes to School grant that they won't be expending that had an offset with a revenue. And then we also had some savings in Pat Cove maintenance. Just as a recap from the prior council meeting, some of the proposed projects for Measure O funding was a slurry sill project for Cliffwood Heights, Riverview Terrace, and Francisco Circle, Bay Avenue paving and streetscape. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll be looking to recruit for the maintenance worker 1, 2. And the allocation of the $245,000 is presented in the chart. To give you an update on reserves, with the transfer in reserves, we're at approximately 1.3 million now, and our target is 1.76 million. Next year, we're projecting approximately $1.84 million as the target, and that's a very rough number. Part of it will have to do with how much transfers occur, because when we look at the calculation of the reserve balances, it doesn't include the percentage on top of transfers to the reserves and to some of the other transfer account items like CIP. Something I wanted to also show is the internal service funds and compensated absences. The effect of that $400,000 transfer. If you look at the equipment replacement fund, typically it had a fund balance ranging between $250,000 and $400,000. Right now it's projected to end at $130,000. The same with information technology. Was historically, it looks as high as $345,000, but on average it's about $180,000, and now it's down to $28,000. So this leaves little room for replenishing equipment. So as part of the next fiscal year process, a consideration may be as if you wanted to allocate some funding to the internal service funds. An update on the Pat Cove relocation plan. The initial debt issuance was for $2.3 million, and the expenses to date are itemized, which have been $2 million. We have a remaining balance of close to $300,000. So there's still some fiscal uncertainties included in the budget. We have $85,000 in revenue from a property sale. If that falls through, then that takes away that $86,000 residual piece. And we have some potential impacts from the RDA dissolution. Right now, that's an unknown. We don't know if there might be some additional litigation expenses that might occur due to the Rispin property or their implementation of a real property management plan if it comes to that. And then we may receive some additional revenues from the county for a refund of property tax administration fees. Preliminary projections for fiscal year 13 is planned budget. Originally, we had about $300,000 in unallocated funding for grants, CIP, and discretionary spending. That amount has grown to about $546,000. And that's when I mentioned earlier in the presentation, I believe it was a $580,000 number, kind of ties for here. So if you wanted to go back to that residual spending level, if all things hold out, then we'll be having a $546,000 residual amount to be able to cover those. But then again, right now we haven't had the departments go into their fiscal year 13 budgets and estimate it. This is primarily based on looking at the historical budget, making some adjustments for core revenues and some known salary changes. We'll have better information as we go through this budget process. And also listed below is some potential Measure O uses. This is based on the city manager's report that was given earlier. And so in looking at these numbers, just slightly different, that's the same, pretty much the same distribution as what was presented. Questions?
Michael?
The $250,000 admin fee for the successor agency, is that showing anywhere?
It is included in the budget. It is considered to be continuing. Whether the oversight board approves that, it would be up to those biannual meetings.
And forgive me, but the PERS transfer of $180,000, was that an accelerated pay down of the POB?
No, it wasn't an accelerated payment of the POB. We had an internal service fund that was almost like a pass-through fund.
Right.
Historically, it had accumulated some residual funds that were in excess of the amount.
Okay.
And we decided to close that and just take it straight from the general fund now, especially that we're at the cap of our PERS cost. There wouldn't necessarily be the need to accumulate anything to help smooth, because we're right at the cap right now.
We only have 3 years left in the POB at this point, so basically we're making the payments as we would any payments out of the general fund, as opposed to accumulating POB in a fund of its own.
Right. I wasn't here when that fund was established, and one of the things that happened is when Tori came on as finance director, she sort of looked at how we were making the debt payments into the PERS fund, and there was this pass-through fund that was, for whatever reason, getting a little bit more into it than it was spending every year. And so that was one of the things we did in last year's budget. When we were looking for money, is we made the determination and recommendation to the council that we didn't need to continue to maintain this fund. We could close it out, and that was a source of one-time funds, which was allocated in last year's budget.
At the time, we put that fund together because there was great trepidation on the part of the council having a $670,000 a year bond payment. So we wanted to really, really make sure that was there, even though we can all agree that pension obligation bond was a good thing now that we see the horizon. But that was the genesis of it.
And we still have a separate pension obligation fund that does have some residual fund balance in it also.
How much is that?
It'll be just a second.
And we're not necessarily looking to disperse that potential $200,000. We're just being informed of it and receiving the report, correct?
That would be my recommendation. I mean, everything that we're doing tonight is really, the purpose of the mid-year is kind of a way station report, sort of a barometer of how we're doing for the fiscal year. And previously, what we've needed to do is find adjustments that we could make to close a gap. This year, we have a little bit of extra money in this year's budget. My suggestion would be leave that fund balance alone, and next year in the budget cycle, you could allocate it. However, you know, there is additional money that could be allocated into one of the internal service funds. We could put more money into the reserves. I do think some fund balance projection in the general fund is good, just because, as the council knows well, revenues and expenditures tend to vary a bit over 6 months, and I wouldn't expect us to be exactly accurate in the final projection.
I think Larry is running the production booth back there.
Not any longer.
Not any longer? He's gone?
Kathy's here.
Oh, I was going to ask about the IT fund. I see it went down substantially because of our budget and because of the fund transfers. Do we see anything in the near future that will seriously impact that? Any equipment allocation? I mean, we're always turning equipment over, and I know that Larry has his finger on the pulse of that. And you know, it'd be good to know if there's a server looming in the future, and he goes, yeah, we may have enough in there. I'm just trying to get a gauge of that internal service fund.
Our new website.
The new website is...
I did meet with him and talk about some bigger picture projects, and I know he was talking to me a little bit about some of our data issues that we have throughout the city, throughout the building here. We've also talked a lot about, in the long term, whether this comes from there or comes from directly from community development, some sort of the case management software for planning projects. There are a number of big ticket items that are out there. At this point, they're deferred, but you can only put those things off for so long until you start impacting services.
More questions? Thank you.
Goodness.
And to respond to your question about the pension obligation fund, in fiscal year 10-11, we had $470,000 in fund balance, and we're projecting about $250,000 to $300,000 in fund balance at fiscal year 13.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back to the budget hearings last May. And I thought we had agreement at that time that if we ran a surplus at mid-year here, that this money would go into reserves. I would not have voted for that budget unless I knew that. And so I'm just telling you where my stand is right now, that I think every bit of this money that we have right now needs to go into either to contingency reserve or emergency reserves, particularly emergency reserves. You know, we're too vulnerable as a community to not have any money in that reserve account. So I'll just tell you where I'm standing right now with anything that's excess on this budget hearing right now. I thought we made that agreement.
And it's projected to put money into that fund.
With the proposed budget amendment in front of you tonight, correct me if I'm wrong, Tori, but I believe that we have $200,000 that we're proposing to transfer into the reserves, plus
I believe it's 133 from Measure O.
133 Measure O. So you'd be making tonight, with the measure as it stands, it'd be 333 plus or minus transfer into reserves. That amount could be increased. You could increase that up to by a couple $100,000, which would be coming from the general fund balance right now that we're projecting.
Okay, thank you.
Sam.
Thank you, Mayor. And we had approved a schedule for fully funding our emergency and contingency reserves over a period of 3 years, 3 to 5 years. So, I mean, we could accelerate that, but kind of get ahead of the schedule that we had already planned on. My particular question, Jamie, was you suggested that we should maybe budget 13-14 with a surplus, realizing that there's some shifts. Do you have a sense of what percentage we should be looking at as a margin of error?
Let me clarify. What I was suggesting is that there's a value of having some money in fund balance. And what that basically is it's sort of the bank account, if you will, for the city, the general fund balance. Right now we're projecting about $300,000 in year-ending fund balance. My inclination is that $200,000 is probably, I would suggest not going much below that. We've had years since I've been here where between now and the close of the year we were off by, I don't think more than $200,000 unless something really calamitous happened, but somewhere in that range if a number of things sort of all trend the same direction.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. Oh, and maybe one, I was going to ask, there was a lot of helpful information on the presentation here that's not in our packet. Could we, at least I would like to have that maybe emailed to me so that we can have that, and maybe
Certainly.
other council members as well. So.
Of course.
The comment was to have the additional information that we saw on the screen emailed to the council members, because we don't have all of that in our packets that we have.
One point of clarification I did want to make. There was a slide that was put up about the reserves, and there was the chart showing how our reserves were depleted due to the pipe failure, and then an indication or an estimation of where the reserve funding target level was this year, and then Tori explained how she was estimated it for next year. I will note that that figure, based on the direction we got the staff in December from the council, will go up by 10% when we follow up with our new reserve funding targets. You'll recall that we are currently have a 10% contingency reserve funding target, which we have recommended and the council's directed move to 15, the emergency reserve from 5 to 10%. So there would be an increase in that target.
What are the balances right now on all the reserves? What are the balances? Am I looking at them right here?
I think we actually took action on that last time and gave direction to you that I think it was a consensus of the council that we did want to go to 10 and 15% from 5 and 10.
Right.
And that was in view of some of the other cities we saw in the benchmark study, that was the only place we were a little deficient.
Yeah, we do plan on bringing that policy back. Frankly, I was imagining we were going to be including it here. We just had too many other things to put it into this package, whether we bring it now or we bring it with next year's budget. But yes, we're operating under that assumption that our new funding target is 25% of the general fund expenditures. And the current reserve balance
is just over $900,000, because if you take out the transfers of about $336,000, with that projection we're at 1.35.
Did you break them down?
I could get that number for you.
But in rough numbers, our total reserves are 1.35 tonight based on the staff recommendation. Obviously, if you were to transfer more, it would be higher.
Okay.
By our old standards, it should be 1.86. Is that true?
Plus
Yes.
or minus. Yeah.
So we've done nicely bringing it up to, anticipating not a 4-year timeline, but maybe a 2. We could see that reserves come up at least to our old standards by the end of next year.
It's certainly possible if we continue to see economic recovery and the council continues to allocate funding to the reserve. Certainly we should be able to get to our old standard. If not next fiscal year, I would anticipate the year after.
Ed, do you have some comments?
The only comment is I do see some merit in retaining a fund balance, and so I would want to just put some kind of limit on how much we transferred if we did into reserves. I think, I think it makes sense to leave a little bit in there rather than transfer it all. And I know we are committed to increase the reserves.
Well, and the issue we have a couple of times during the year is just cash flow. And so if we had a little more money in that, we wouldn't have to keep borrowing from the other funds and just, for cash flow purposes. So I would certainly hope that we can find at least $100,000 when we start discussing this during the budget to put back into the IT fund, because we did take quite a bit out of that, and so that we have those reserves higher. And also, I'd really like to find a way to put a line item and have the $240,000 for community groups as a line item, so they don't have to worry year after year after year after year whether they're going to be funded or not, and have a discussion at a later council meeting about the formula that we used to have of it being a percentage of the sales tax and the property tax, and if it goes up, they get a little bit more. If it goes down, they get a little bit less, so that we can have some long-range planning here and put it in the budget like we used to have, so that would be 240. But also, I'd love to do some more road work, and if there's any way that we find we have a little extra money somewhere to do another project and really start getting up to speed with our delayed repairs that we've had for so many years. Other questions or comments?
So our recommendation tonight would be the council moves the budget, approves the budget amendment, which would make the transfers into the reserves and the other budget amendments that we've proposed in the mid-year. And in addition, it would authorize us to go out and recruit for a maintenance position, a public works crew member position, consistent with the December allocation of the Measure O funding. So that's what we're looking for tonight on this item, and then I'll take us back and talk a little bit about our budget principles and look for council direction into how we prepare the budget for next year.
And we would be moving and approving the transfer into CIP for the additional road work, correct?
Right.
So the only thing in question, I think, to Dennis's point, is do we leave the $200,000 in the general fund, or are we going to push every penny into the piggy bank? And I think that basically it doesn't make a lot of difference, because we use that money to do the cash flow. I think psychologically it sends a message in that we just keep packing the money in reserves, and we can still use it for cash flow, but as the cash changes, there is still that balance that goes back. So let's say we need that $200,000, but then as soon as a next payment comes in from the state or the county, it goes right back into reserves. So I'd kind of be in favor of putting it in reserves and, letting it sit there. We can always take it out. We can always use it. It's there for us.
Is that number 200 or 300,000?
200, I think, isn't it?
299, isn't that the?
299, yes.
299, okay.
My recommendation would be not, the reason not to do it is to take the full 299 is that it's, that would be a flip of a coin that we would end up the year with the general fund being negative. Now, is that a real big problem for us? It's more psychological. It sets off some alerts with some folks. So my suggestion is do leave a cushion in there, because, like I said, this is our best guess. It's a flip of a coin whether we end up a little bit above 299, a little bit below 299. I think by and large it's better to run a positive fund balance at year end.
Yeah.
Sam?
And if I may, I want to inquire about our committed funds for litigation expenses, whether you feel we're fully funded for whatever eventualities may occur in that arena for this fiscal year, and whether or not we should maybe hold back some of these funds so that we can feel fully confident that we can carry out our mission, so to speak.
Councilmember Story, we've proposed increasing the city attorney's budget to fund the litigation by, is it $100,000? We feel that will get us through this fiscal year, based on our best guess. That being said, we're sort of going into uncharted waters. The city has not sued a multinational corporation before. This is the first time we're working with this attorney. It has been an intensive process. Our attorney was forced to go to London to take depositions from the insurance company this last week. It isn't cheap. So our recommendation about the $100,000 we think will get us through the fiscal year. However, I certainly would be prepared if we're going to embark on this path, and I think it's a good path because I think the city should try to recover the funds that we should rightfully been paid. But I think if we're going to go into it, we do need to be prepared to backstop it and fund it completely. Going in halfway doesn't make sense. So I think it would be wise counsel to keep, at least in the back of your mind, the potential that some of this money does need to go into that litigation in the future.
Do we want to put it in his department, or do we want to have a separate department for litigation? Because it sounds like it's going to his firm when it's not going to go to his firm. It's going to go to the separate firm that we're using.
I think it goes into the department and the city attorney. It is then, there's a separate project code that funds the litigation. So at this higher level, it does look like it's all going in there, but when we actually look down into the department, it is segregated.
The news story today did make it look like Barrisoni was getting an additional $100,000, and that's not the case.
It did.
Yeah,
The news reporter
right.
obviously didn't quite get that exactly right, because we were transferring it into the department. It didn't mean that the city attorney, as an individual, was receiving the money. It is going to a third-party special counsel that the city's hired, who specifically does this type of litigation work.
For the sake of simplification, you know, if we are anticipating more legal costs and we have that $300,000, if we were to divide it in half and leave some in the general fund would be able to then support that, whatever those legal needs would be?
I think we're all operating, I mean, that sort of proposal seems reasonable to me. It's within the margin of error. I had suggested leaving a $200,000 balance in the general fund, 150. You know, I don't think it's terribly important. The money doesn't go away wherever you put it.
Right.
Councilmember Termini's point was well taken. That being said, it does demonstrate a commitment if you can put more money into the reserves, and I think it's appropriate. That said, I think Councilmember Story's points are well taken as well, that we want to be able to fund relatively easily the litigation, and probably pulling it out of the reserves to do it would be potentially problematic. And in addition, too, is it's not great to end the year negative. So whether it's you leave $200,000 in there, 150, I think that's council has the discretion in that
Jamie,
regard.
how do you, as a city manager, look at funds that are in a general fund as compared to something in contingency reserve? When you go to get money, is there a bit of reluctance when you pull something out of contingency reserve as to compared to pulling something out of the general fund?
As a city manager, it's difficult to make a recommendation to use the contingency reserve unless it's something that's, you know, clearly very important to the city and the city's continued operation and to provide services. So there is a psychological difference in terms of how the funds are allocated. So for example, if the council were to identify a new project that we wanted to do, for example, repair a bridge or repair a road, the first place I would look if the council asked me for money would be, is there any savings I can find within an existing department? If there isn't, is there fund balance that could be allocated? And probably the third place would be into the contingency and emergency.
How do you look at it as far as cash shortfalls? I mean, is there any reluctance to go into contingency for those and go back?
For that purpose, the contingency reserve is essentially, after fund balance, is the first.
So putting things in reserve, we're actually building a savings for cash shortfalls. We're bringing our reserves back at a quicker pace, particularly emergency reserves, which are really depleted. And so, if we have 300,000, leaving 100,000 in the general fund, and then put the other 200 back into that, as long as you know that it's a safety net for us, I think that's a good place for it. I like the thought that there's a second thought given before we allocate general fund money over reserves at this point, particularly showing to the community that we're doing our due diligence in recovering from this last year.
Yeah.
And
Well,
just for clarification, there's about $213,000 now in fund balance. So the 299 or 300,000 is projected with the 85,000 that we're anticipating to come over in the year. So that
From the land?
from just general operations, from our general revenue estimate. So to move it all, we would be saying, yes, we're banking 100% on this year's estimates, whereas we have more of a known $200,000 versus the other 85 coming in from the remainder of the year's operations.
So it's not money in the bank right now.
Sam?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess, and Dennis, I certainly, understand your perspective and do support it. I think we should refund our reserves as quickly as possible. But, it seems to me that we have these kind of two competing needs for that fund balance. One, the reserve, and one, our interest in being in a position of strength in this litigation battle with Lexington Insurance. And I think it would just feel uncomfortable to me if some point later down the road we got into very, expensive litigation before the end of the fiscal year, and we were also all of a sudden feeling like, well, that we have to pull money out of the reserves in order to fund it. And I know it's a psychological difference, but I think it's a significant psychological difference. And it may, from the public's perspective, it may not look as prudent. And we could, and I'm certainly willing to commit if we're able to get through this fiscal year and whatever funds that are left in the fund balance, then it could be committed at that time to the reserves. So I would suggest that maybe we hold back $200,000 just to present a sense of strength to ourselves and to Lexington Insurance, so that they're aware that we have the capability to fund this litigation that we're in with them, and maybe take 99, or in essence 100,000, and go ahead and move that into reserve now. But I would like to maybe see us hold back the 200,000 until the end of the fiscal year, and then move it.
I'd like to propose a motion, just in an effort to get us off the dime on this, and that is, as the city manager recommended, that we split the 299 in half to go to reserves, about roughly 150,000, bringing us up to 1.5 million in reserves, and the other half being kept in the general fund.
I'll second that motion.
I agree with Sam's position. I think having to explain to people that we took money out of reserves for a lawsuit just sounds bad, even though the money's there for whatever we want to use it for. But I think it looks better that we have committed some funds, adequate funds for that, and not have to take it out of reserves later on.
Remember, we have the 100,000 that we put over into the legal line item, so we have that, plus the 150 we're leaving in reserve. So, I think we can beat Lexington about the head and shoulders with $250,000, at least through the rest of this year.
We hope.
Are you listening? Lexington, hello.
Ed.
Madam Mayor, I think we're all saying the same thing. I think we all really agree on what we want to do, and we want to leave a little bit in the fund. And Mike pitched the first number, so there it is. But I really believe we all agree on this. I would love to vote 5-0 on this and say, we've got a great number. And I don't know if splitting it at 150 is the magic number. I think I thought I heard you say, Tori, that there was some additional revenue that's already in the fund.
We have a fund balance right now of just over 200,000, 213,000.
Okay. Because my initial impulse was I wanted to go along with the 200,000 just to have a respectable number there. But if we already have the 200 and we put in 150, just for the sake of solidarity, I'd like to say that leaves us about 350,000 in the fund. Is that what I'm? Somewhere around
No, I think what Tori was saying was the current balance in the general fund is about 200,000, and to get to the $300,000 year-end figure, the 299, all the budget assumptions would need to come through. So what she's saying is today there isn't that money to put in. I'm not so worried about that because we do fund accounting, and the timing of the transfer would obviously depend on when the money is available.
And you feel good about 150 in each?
I'd be more comfortable with leaving 200 in the general fund and transferring 100 into the reserves. But again, I think this is angels on the head of a pin. I don't think it's that important.
Can you make a friendly amendment to your own?
And I do think that everyone's on the same page here.
I think we're on the same.
It's still our money.
But
we're still keeping it. I'm
it's
trying
a cycle. Before you make a friendly amendment to your own motion, I just want to say I don't view that there's a really significant substantive difference, about $50,000. I think that we can present the point. I think $250,000 is probably going to be sufficient through the end of the fiscal year. And if we do deplete quite a bit of it, then we can reconsider that in the next fiscal year's budget. So
Exactly.
I was fine with that number, and was going to support it,
I'll leave
Mike,
my motion at 150 in each.
in the sense of solidarity. So.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions?
Call the question.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
So the next thing we have on our agenda is to talk a little bit about our budget principles. And what the purpose behind this is, it gives the City Council an opportunity to give staff guidance and direction prior to the preparation of the draft budget. The draft budget, will come out in mid-May, and by that point in the game, staff has really developed, sort of taken all the projects and programs and efforts that we've identified and we've been working on over the years, put dollars attached to them, updated our revenue assumptions, and we develop a pretty complete package for the council to review. I originally proposed this budget principle several years back to try to get feedback from the council before we sit down and do that work. Are there things that the council would like to see us do differently, like to see us do more of, do less of, that kind of direction? And so you'll recall that we kind of developed an overarching principle, was develop projects and programs to maintain and enhance the quality of life in Capitola. And that was really kind of the guiding light, if you will, from the council's direction when we first did this. Then what we did as staff was we tried to develop goals and projects underneath each one of the different principles, and then benchmarks and measures to see how we were doing getting there. You'll recall that we've established 4 basic categories of budget principles. We have fiscal policy principles, we have public service principles, we have public improvement projects, and then we have public improvement possibilities, I think. And part of that was, I think, when we were trying to merge the historic kind of annual goal-setting session into this process and identifying what were the possibilities, what were the things that council wanted to see us work on in the coming year. So you'll recall we had our fiscal policy principles that we've identified as maintaining a balanced budget without depleting reserves or assets. I think that's still very timely and appropriate. Supporting economic development and maintaining responsible fees. In those regards, we've begun reestablishing the reserves as we took another step towards earlier this evening. Our finance department has received awards for its budget and CAFR for the last fiscal year. We publish financial management reports on the websites. We've completed multiple audits associated with the redevelopment agency dissolution, and there very well might be more down the road. We've updated our purchasing ordinance to streamline the purchasing policies. We did issue a release in RFP for McGregor as in this economic development project, though we didn't receive any responses or proposals to that RFP. Under public service principles, one of the basic principles was maintain a transparent and efficient government. We had recognizing the high priority the community placed on public safety by fully funding and staffing our police department, and then continuing to fund or review funding for the CIP, the Chamber, the CVC, the Begonia Festival, and our former community grant recipients. And I apologize, but the acronym eludes me right now for what we've renamed that program. Key things that we've gotten done along those lines is implemented promotional marketing, new promotional marketing programs in our recreation. We are going to have a conversation, I believe, in the next couple meetings about the recreation program fee increases. As the council is aware, some of our recreation program revenue has not met budget, and our recreation manager is suggesting that we may want to dial back on some of the fee changes that we've put in place in the last couple of years. That's coming for a future meeting. The police department has put in a great community art program in their police department lobby. For those of you who had the joy of visiting it, we filled several vacant positions in the police department. We have a number of big public art projects that are scheduled for completion this coming summer. We've got the website update process going. Village Foot Patrol has been something that I've really wanted to see happen over the last several years. We're going to see that this next summer, where we're going to have officers who are going to be out there at sort of prime time, if you will, in the village during the summer and see if we can nip some of the activity we see there in the bud. We also implemented a contract with the City of Santa Cruz for lifeguard services, which again, the council will see a new contract in the coming months, a coming meeting actually, I believe, to update that and continue that relationship on for several more years. The public improvement principles that we identified was continuing to maintain our infrastructure, focusing on the pavement management program, that ensure programs are in place to respond to development projects on McGregor and other public properties. And that was a little bit of the sort of trying to figure out where we were going to go with Rispin, where we were going to go with McGregor, and then maintain and improve natural resources and support sustainable programs. So some of the key things that we got done here was the Pacific Cove, that one piece of property. We've really made a lot of progress, obviously, in terms of what that future use of that piece of public property is going to be. The plastic bag ban is going to be in effect here in several weeks, I believe.
April 15th.
April 15th. The Rispin property is still pending the final determination by the Department of Finance and the RDA dissolution. So unfortunately, we haven't really tackled a lot of the projects on the Rispin project, but as soon as we can get that project out of the phantom toll booth, if you will, I think then we should be able to start focusing on really trying to get that thing open for public use. We've increased our solid waste diversion by 3%, and we had a food collection waste pilot project we've run through the pilot program, and Lisa will be making a recommendation to you about how that program should either continue or not moving it forward. Measure O passed, and we've allocated $100,000 to the CIP for this summer's pavement management, and we completed a citywide slurry seal project this last summer. Then we get into some of the real tricky ones. We had supporting the Capitola Library, the skate park and dog park, improving pedestrian and ADA access, and opening the Rispin to the public. The Capitola Library is one project that I think is on track and is something that I think this council is really going to want to focus on in the next year or so. The Capitola Library has funding that's being allocated from our successor agency. We anticipate in the next couple of years that we will be making all of the payments that are due pursuant to that agreement with the county, which means that we're going to have about $2.6 million available to build a brick and mortar library for our community. In addition, there is conversations about maybe finding ways to supplement those funds with non-city revenue for a library. And so I think it's going to be an exciting project that we're going to get to work on in coming months and hopefully in the next fiscal year. The skate and dog parks have been difficult. I don't probably need to remind the council of that, but none of the sites that have been identified to date have worked. That's a project that in the past has been a priority for the council, and I would like to hear tonight whether that's something that you'd like us to continue to put effort into. I think improving ADA and pedestrian access is something that we do every year. We always allocate the funding in the budget, the $10,000, as well as always looking for opportunities to improve sidewalks and improve access. And then opening the Rispin property to the public. Again, the Rispin property, occasionally as city staff we have this feeling that when projects go bad, they just stay bad and they get really tough and they never get any easier. And the Rispin is sort of like an ongoing saga. Hopefully we will near some completion with the Department of Finance, and we will get clarity about the ownership, at which time I would like to be able to grab the bull by the horns, find some good grant funding, and really get the project into a stable setting. So my goal for tonight is really to hear from the council. Before we go and prepare the budget for next year, what are we doing that you'd like us to do more of, less of? Are there specific projects you'd like us to focus on? Are there specific programs? Are there specific things that you think deserve staff time that aren't getting enough staff time, or maybe deserve less staff time moving forward? I've organized this a little bit differently tonight, where we really, I sort of highlighted public service, fiscal, or public improvements, but I'm open to any sort of format the council would like to take. And really, I think we're here just to listen to the council, and we'll take the information that we receive, assemble it into the budget, develop the budget, and then try to identify tangible milestones and performance measures as we move forward. So with that, I'm available for questions, and we can kick off the workshop.
I like, everything we've put down before, and to continue on the same path. And I especially like the chart that you gave us after Measure O passed, showing how you allocated the next few years to meet the goals that we set down for you. So as far as I'm concerned, we need to just stay the course. And you're doing a good job. I could use less printed matter. Thank you, Finance Department. But I think all in all, we're firing on all cylinders here. I believe the city is running as well or better than it has ever run. And I applaud the staff on that one. And I think it should be underscored that we have the chief of police to thank for a $250,000 savings in overtime. When was the last time we saw that? I don't remember it. So that's it. That's all I have.
Sam.
I agree with Michael. I mean, I really like the framework and some of the overriding principles that we have already established. There may be some tweaks and some language of some of these items, for example, if I may just ask about under the public service principles in number 3, there's a reference to continuing funding for the CVC and the chamber, and I recall that through the TOT discussions that there was some agreement that the CVC was not going to be coming back to us for continuation funding. So I would just, I mean, if that's the case, we should maybe consider whether or not we want to keep that as a priority or as a stated
They are going to be asking
principle.
us for money, not the other jurisdictions, because the other jurisdictions passed the increase in the transient occupancy tax.
Oh,
but they
wait a
were-
minute, wait a minute. The CVC increased its
TMD.
TMD, which is covering all the jurisdictions' contributions. I am not prepared to give the CVC a dime. They had their big bump last
Yeah.
year, not only in TOT but in the other fund they get. So, based on that, and that's countywide, regardless of jurisdiction, they got all their money. The only real focus, and thank you, Sam, for bringing that up.
Well,
The thing that I really
And I wasn't trying to get an answer to that question tonight.
No,
but-
I think you got an answer. I'm hearing answers. But I think that the chamber is the one that was really hamstrung and still fought the good fight after us reducing it. And I think that's the organization that really has boots on the ground and does the work for us and needs full funding next year. But that's for budget time. We don't.
Right. Well, I just, we may be faced with those questions during budget time, but though maybe we don't want to set the stage to limit our options by having that as a stated principle in this document. So I would suggest maybe deleting that reference at least to the CVC, and then we can have the open discussion at the time in the budget if they should come forth with a request, and we would fairly consider it. I also wanted to ask under public improvement principles, or maybe, yes, it is public improvements, and the one concerning the development on private properties, what is the status of the village potential hotel site, the parking lot currently? Are we seeing any movement there? Is it time to maybe list that as a particular outcome for the next fiscal year?
We're talking about the site of the old Capitola
Yes,
Theater.
the theater.
Yeah. So that project is, at this point, is married at the hip to our general plan update. The complication, frankly, that the developer faced was that within the framework of our existing LCP, they were going to have a difficult time or were unwilling to propose a project that was consistent with that existing LCP, and originally had proposed moving forward an independent LCP amendment on its own. You'll recall that is one of the reasons why the Coastal Commission, ostensibly one of the reasons why the Coastal Commission denied the La Bahia project in Santa Cruz, that it was a standalone project. So what ended up happening was to try to get a better picture for what the hotel at that site would and should look like, and to integrate it into the city's overall vision for the village and the community as a whole. They became wedded to the general plan. And so, in fact, as part of the general plan update, the developer has contributed some funding wherein the city hired an architect and conducted some focused workshops about that site and about what the hotel could look like. So I can tell you that I have been hearing from the developer. They would like to move forward. They frankly would like the city to move its general plan forward more quickly. So we do get pressure from them in that regard. But the ball is in our court at this point, and it's not a question of them not performing. It's the question of their telling me that they're chomping at the bit. They just want us to get our LCP done and submitted, and they'll turn around with a project for us.
Would it be prudent then to list this as a goal, just to keep it, in front of us, and to kind of encourage us to move forward, do our part, so to speak?
I think a terrific goal would be to get the general plan done.
Okay.
There's
And
a goal for you. How
don't-
about stopping spending money on the general plan?
And
There's a goal.
Those go hand in hand,
could
right?
happen.
Complete
It
it,
could
and then
happen,
we don't
yeah.
have to spend money on it anymore. So maybe we should include that then as one of our goals for the next year. And I think those were the only proposed changes that I would suggest to this to the document principle.
Dennis?
Just taking off on the Capitol Theater property, there's two consciousnesses that I don't think the owner-developer has made with that property. Number one is that the Coastal Commission is married to unions. And if they don't come to that realization, they're not going to get this project out of the ground. And number two is that there will be a huge battle in this community if they try and push the parking down in that underneath that building. That will lock that thing up for years. So they have to come to consciousness they're not going to put that parking down underneath that building. And so if they don't come to consciousness, we're just into a huge community battle over this project for coming years. And so maybe, it may be, you know, I mean, we don't have any control who owns the property, but certainly the word should get out to them that there's certain parameters beyond the general plan that would make or break that project, and whether it comes forward to us. And we've been waiting a long time for it, you know, and there will be a lot of discussions about size and scale. Rudy, I'm really happy to hear the thing about foot policemen in the village. I think that's really exciting. We need it for a long time. Just a philosophical thing. I've always felt that we have a very limited number of properties that are owned by the city, and we always are trying to fit projects into them. We always say, you know, every single piece of property we try and shove something into, and it usually is a big thing in a small hole, but we put things to it. What is wrong with keeping property for the next 2 generations and just let it sit there? I'm talking about McGregor, I'm talking about Rissman. There's nothing wrong with Rissman's. Just tear the fences down, open it to the public, and leave it like it is for the next 50 years if that's what the public wants. We don't have to force something into every single space that we have. We have so limited things. And so I'm not really ready to give up on the skateboard park issue. I've seen the walls like all of us have seen, you know, limitations of how we could do it. I still think there may be answers. I think we duly owe it to the kids of this town. And I'll tell you, since we began discussing it, we've gone through a generation or probably 2 generations of kids that have already passed on to driving cars now. But they're still coming along. My street alone, it isn't an afternoon that I don't see 3 kids playing out on my street alone with skateboards. Why are they out there? They're out there because there's nothing local that gets them off the street. And so we need to provide for them. They're as important with our resources as any adult is in this community. Dogs, I mean, what can we say? Everybody's walked to precincts in this community and knows how many dogs live here. The people here would like to have a dog park, and I think that there seems to be an acceptance. There seems to be that a fenced dog park would be suitable for this community, and they would use it. I don't see people out there asking us for off leash right now, so maybe we should be looking at that. General plan update. I would think that we're going to be close within a year of this budget sessions of completing the general plan update and the zoning ordinance. I'm hoping we are. That's the schedule. So that would be a priority item that we need to get ourselves through this year, especially since we've already committed to expending the money. Is that going to happen, Jamie?
I'm committed to making it happen. I haven't looked at the work plan for the general plan, but I think that off the top of my head, I think we should be in front of the city council relatively soon. And it looks like our interim community development director is here to give us the update. But yes, I think it's a terrific goal, and it's something that's going to take a lot of focus from all of us to get done.
It is a goal, and I wanted to let you know that on March 14th at your council meeting that night, our consultant is going to come, and we're going to talk about some of the preliminary land use plan that we have for the general plan, but we will also have a new schedule for you, which basically has it on track, talks about some ideas of perhaps after the draft general plan comes out in June, maybe having a couple joint council planning commission meetings to talk about various parts of it. So when the whole package comes out, the draft general plan, local coastal plan, zoning ordinance, EIR, and everything else, it's going to be a large amount of material, and we want to make certain that people have an opportunity to sort of work through it. And so we may ask you to change the schedule and do a few things up front, but I don't think in the end it will make the process longer.
Thank you.
So you'll be getting a whole update on that on the 14th.
Great. I only have one more thing that has to deal with. It appears, and we did make a commitment to the community during this last sales tax initiative, that we would be working our streets. And so I don't want to get that lost. I'm hoping that Steve will keep on top of the CIP program and keep coming to us with projects, because we do have a commitment there, and we should fulfill that this next year. Okay. Thank you.
Ed?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what we've mentioned. The hotel is a great thing to proceed on, which is tied to the general plan. So I'd like to keep that on here as a goal. I'm with Dennis on the skate park and the dog park. We really need to stay on that. I would like to find some money someplace to, I'm with you, Dennis, to open up the RISPN. I just don't want to open it up unless it's safe, and I don't believe it's safe right now. I don't want to open it up if it exposes liability to us, and if we can figure out a way to do that, I'd really like to keep that on the front burner and make that happen. Just open it up, but it's got to be safe, and whatever that means, whatever we can agree on, that's good. And the only other thing that I'd like to add in public improvement possibilities is a lot of the general plan meetings, a lot of the groups we got together, the forums, people talked about the cleanliness of the Esplanade, so I'd really like to make a commitment towards increased cleaning of the Esplanade and a way to improve the trash management, whether we're picking up the garbage more often, whether we're improving the containers, but just the whole smell, cleanliness appeal of the Esplanade. If we can add that into one of our possibilities, that would be a great area to focus on.
And we talk about that every year. And the last figure that I got from Mr. Jesberg was that it costs $3,000 every time we steam clean down there. And but it's worth it, I think, to do it during the summer. Do it once a week, and try to encourage the businesses to do it. But you can't force them to do it unless we can think of a way to tax them or twist their arm or something like that.
City manager had a good idea about that, about takeout food, adding a charge to the takeout food license, because the takeout food is what ultimately does it.
Yeah. But that has to be one of our priorities, is keeping the beach and the Esplanade area clean, and the trash picked up adequately, and this bathroom here clean more often during the summertime, because it runs out of toilet paper sometimes, and there's paper on the floor. But my philosophy is that we're here to provide basic services for the community, and we do a good job. And I agree, Mike, with you that we're responsive, we are caring, we're not perfect, but our job is to provide wonderful public safety to our community, and the public works and the cleanliness of the parks and the streets. And we need to put more effort into fixing the streets, and the service we provide in planning and finance and so forth is excellent. And we just need to stay on top of all of that and keep providing excellent service, so that we're a real role model for government, and also to promote ourselves. I think do a newsletter more often so that we can toot our own horn, so that people see what we do and can appreciate what we do. And I'm just so grateful that Measure O passed, so we have some extra money to fix our streets and put back into reserves and so forth. That was just a miracle that happened, because when that does, the first part of it expire in 2017, we would have been looking at trying to raise money at that time, and it's wonderful we could do it now. As far as the RISPN, we do need to talk about the wall at some point, because every once in a while we get emails about, please take the wall down, it looks ugly, it's just painted over, it just gets more graffiti. And so we need to talk about that and have cost about what that would, an estimate of what that would cost to take that down or take half of it down, and maybe that's something we could do this year. As far as that developer, he bought El Rancho Shopping Center on Portola years ago, and Supervisor Jan Boots was on him to, he tore down Peluvios, and he was going to remodel the rest, and it's still sitting there, and she's been out of office for, 4.5 years, and he bought it years before that. So, we can't hold our breath about any project at that theater site, but if there's some way we can expedite that, that would be great. I really like the idea of having a jitney again run around town if we can keep the costs down and if we can promote it better, because I see people walking up Wharf Road all the time, carrying stuff up and down. So even if we just ran it from the village to 41st Avenue or something like that, I don't know, but that was a really neat experiment that we had before. People didn't know about it, and it went to the library and it went to 41st Avenue, and I'm not sure where else it went, but just
Federal parking lot.
It was not a huge success. It wasn't even a big success probably, but just the idea of it is wonderful. We've talked about that here for many, many years, about trying to get people out of their cars and get them where they want to go, which is the beach and 41st Avenue and the library and other places. But so I don't know, small vehicle, inexpensive. Probably the major cost would be labor costs, but if there was some way we could do that, that would be fabulous. So anyway, I agree with all the other comments. I think we're doing a really good job. We need to put more effort and time into code enforcement so that we keep the town looking neat and clean and tidy, and not with these junky signs everywhere and illegal signs and illegal displays outside and so forth. And we just have to stay on top of that. So, but I think we're doing a much better job, and things are looking better. We got rid of that big sign at Whole Foods, and some of the others that were just too much. I'm looking forward to, I guess, the remodel of the gas station on 41st Avenue by the auto dealers. I'm not going to hold my breath over that, but I'm looking forward to that project.
Right after the hotel. And
I'm grateful and thankful that Target is here. That really helps our revenues. We need to continue to do some business retention and development, and however we can do that. I think our staff's doing a great job.
Madam Mayor, there's a couple items that I did want to mention. One is that with the temporary parking lot that's going to be going in Lower Pack Cove, we're proposing to reroute the beach shuttle. And I'm hopeful that I wasn't here when we tried the jitney, but I'm hopeful that the beach shuttle is going to prove to be a little bit more useful in that regard, that people are going to be able to sort of jump on and park their car, park once, and get around town a little bit more. It may open up some possibilities there, because obviously the labor cost of running city shuttle buses around town will bleed us dry pretty quickly. But the beach shuttle we got to do anyway. And if we can leverage that funding and make it actually work pretty well, it's an exciting possibility. We're totally revamping the newsletter right now. Our new front desk staff has a lot of experience in this field, in this arena, and she's been helping us put together a new newsletter, and we're going to, with the new website update, we're going to really be able to enhance its digital delivery. If we can cut down on the actual printing costs, because most people don't appreciate a lot of paper. They're just as happy with an e-newsletter. I would love to take a look and see if we can really use the newsletter as a more useful tool in reaching out to our community. And then the last thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, related to Councilmember Botzar's point about the maintenance and the sidewalks, and Councilmember Termini brought it up as well, is one thing we've been looking at as staff is one of the takeout restaurants in the village, you'll recall, does contribute money to the city to offset the impacts to the sidewalks and the public trash cans. The rest of them don't, and it just has to do with the entitlement permits that we issue. And it doesn't seem particularly fair, frankly, and if there is a way to collect revenue from the folks that do have the takeout businesses, because they are giving people trash, which they're putting in our trash cans, and then we have to empty it. They are putting messes on the street, which we have to clean up. We were looking at whether there was some way that we could do some better cost recovery in that, and then really enhance, get out there 5, 7 times, 8 times, I'm not sure what the magic number is, but far more frequent street cleaning in the village. And the other vehicle we thought that could be a potential to fund that was look at the entertainment permits, because the late night activity, the bars that are staying open till 1 in the morning, those guys are generating more impacts on our streets. They're generating more impacts on our police department. So those were two particular revenue pots of money that we were looking at to enhance village maintenance. Is that something the council would like to see come forward?
Well, or even if we just, we do it 10 times, that's 30,000. 30,000 is worth it to have a really sharp-looking Esplanade and beach. I mean, 30,000 is, that would be 10 weeks. And
Right.
That's not every week, because we start early sometimes when the weather is nice, and we go late sometimes when the weather's beautiful in October. But
I'd like to see it come to us.
But if we can find the money, in from that area, fine. If not, I think we should fund it. It just needs to be a priority for us.
So how do you, existing businesses, how do you raise their fee? I mean, we don't have a mechanism unless they're applying for another use permit, right?
It's a good question. It's one I'd work with the city attorney on, because normally you'd say the business license, just a takeout restaurant in the village would pay a different business license, but I understand now that that's considered a tax. So it may or may not be possible. Obviously, the entertainment permit is something that's relatively easy.
But they're required, they have a use permit, they have to come in every
An
year.
annual permit, right.
Yeah, but the restaurants don't, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if it's possible or not, but it's certainly something I can work on with the city attorney. And I think, as the mayor points out, it's something that maybe there's a sharing. Maybe some of the revenue is raised through fees and some of the money comes from the general fund. Obviously, that would be a decision the council would have to make. But
To be honest with you, there was a time, well, at least on the council, Stephanie, that there was no money coming from the city to do that down there. That any street cleaning that we did down there with water blasting was done by either the property owner or front, or just wasn't even done. So we have pushed money in there in the past. It isn't the first time that we've
And when we
talked
bought
about
that worthless Zambioni, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
That didn't work.
sold to the Santa Cruz.
Yeah, when I made that proposal about the cleaning, the intent was for it to be a shared process. I think we need to increase it. I think we can do it, 3 or 4 times more than we are, but it was with the intent that it was going to, some mechanism to share that, And that's what I heard from the business owners, it's like they shouldn't, nobody wants to bear it all, but hey, we're all willing to clean it up. So whatever you can bring to us.
Some are and some aren't, because, some are doing it themselves anyway, and others, we've talked to them, and they're just like, nope, not interested, so. But we'll work on it. Sam, did you want to say something?
Well, thank you. Well, on the cleaning and, the sharing the expense of that, I just, wanted to, we did just get Measure O approved. They're paying into a portion of that. So we could maybe just consider allocating instead of imposing another fee or well, it'd have to be a fee. I don't think we would get a tax approved, but we could maybe just look at maybe allocating whatever portion of their share of that increase that they're contributing to the general fund toward that effort. The other item I wanted to mention, and Dennis, is actually, it occurred to me when you were talking about why do we need to develop every piece of vacant property that we have, and particularly concerning the McGregor site. I had never particularly, I was on the kind of the losing end of the vote to consider putting a hotel there. And so I'm very willing to maybe look at that for other uses. I don't think we can just leave things fallow and not use them and not develop it. Even if it's just public space, it still needs to be made accessible, made safe, and so some effort. And I would, if we wanted to look, because of the way some of these principles and these goals are written concerning McGregor, it's all pointing to development of some building project there. I'm willing to take that, maybe suggest that we consider saying develop project plan for McGregor instead of revenue positive project plan. That leaves it more open. Maybe we could use it as a dog park. And when we're thinking of developing projects in McGregor, not be constrained to think that can only be some potential hotel there. But that was the majority vote, I think, a couple of years ago when that came up. So I'm certainly willing to, reconsider that. I was thinking maybe some of this language should be changed so it doesn't constrain it to mean that we're going to have a hotel in McGregor and that's our only vision for that site. So I think that we could maybe modify some of this language to
I'll stand with you on that,
open
Sam.
that.
We've learned our lesson about skate parks. You don't put them in residential areas. I mean, there's just no way that you can find a path that's allowable within that community. So a bit of NIMBYism, but at the same time, it's a concern. And we experienced it 4 times now, 4 different places. And we've always shunned going to McGregor. And if you think about it, it's the only place we don't have residential surrounding it. It's also within somewhat a walking distance, not the center of town, but it is walking distance. It could be made more accessible than it is. And the fact that a dog park, same issue. And we've seen from Scotts Valley, they've had great success with a skateboard park next to a dog park. And it gives you one less area that tied together to police. But I'll follow with you on that, Sam.
Okay, well, and if the rest of the council members, I would just, the language under the public improvement principles number 2, the goal number 2, where it says develop revenue positive project plan, we just strike revenue positive, just say develop project plan for McGregor. Then I think it kind of opens it up for more political discussion and more possibilities to meet some of our other goals of maybe a skate park, a dog park, and not to preclude that it could be even a hotel if that's what the majority of the council should desire.
We've gone through 2 cycles now. We're going out.
Well, I know.
And nobody wants it.
Nobody wants it, and so maybe we should just face the music and
Well,
decide to
State
make it.
Parks was interested in it at one point, but that was a long time ago and when they had some money, but they were thinking about maybe putting some sort of a convenience store there for their campers, because the campers come and some of them stay a week during the summertime, and if they want to get some milk or some groceries or something like that, there's no place that's really very close for them to do that. So they were, at one point, they were just throwing around the idea of leasing it to some sort of an operator that would put that kind of a facility there, because they thought it was a great service to their campers. They have a huge campground there, and of course a lot of them are RVs that are self-contained. But did you want to make a comment about this?
So I was just going to let you know, as part of our general plan, local coastal plan update, the McGregor site is one of the ones that we are looking at, because about 10 years ago there was an interpretation made about what the local coastal plan said about that property, which severely limited the amount of area that could be developed. So as part of your general plan, local coastal plan process, we're looking at trying to work with the Coastal Commission and change that. So potentially, a year and a half from now, when your general plan, local coastal plan are done, you would have a lot more opportunity and flexibility about what you could or could not do on that property. So I would just encourage you not to make a whole lot of decisions before you know how much of the property you're going to be able to use.
Does that mean that the areas that we thought were unbuildable may go into the building envelope?
That's correct. It's related to the wording about the riparian habitat, which is actually at the bottom of the property.
Right.
And it was interpreted that covered the entire property.
It covered a lot of the top of the property.
Yes, that's correct.
That may have had something to do with us not getting a response. But I have to tell you, as much as I am a hotel fanatic and get as many as you can, build them, rake in the money, I think that's a great spot. It's one of the better spots if there's other things coordinated with it, like the dog park. We could do some safe walking improvements, more sidewalks and how to get there and crosswalks, what have you. And I guarantee you, even though there isn't a house within a half a mile of that property, we'll still fill this place up with people who don't want a skate park. Go figure. Not that I'm not willing to vote for it, but guaranteed that will happen.
One of the things I'd like to talk about during the budget hearings this year also is I think last year, charged the Begonia Festival and the car show a permit fee. And I know the Begonia Festival, did we waive it? I can't remember, but just want to talk about it because, the Begonia Festival doesn't have extra money to be paying us $5,000 or
Well,
whatever it was.
we can always grant them more money because we had in the past granted them money, but I think that we have to be careful with our special event permit because we have a lot of special events.
Yeah.
And if we let one organization, even though it's the Chamber or the Begonia Festival, have a free special event permit, we're going to have the Mermaid Marathon, we're going to have Wharf to Wharf, and all of the other events are going to line up and be asking for the same thing. So we need to be very careful with
I know. I just wanted to bring it up as a topic to consider a creative way that we can do that. And it's also the car show. The car show doesn't make money to have to give us money for a special permit, and it goes right back in. The city's benefit is for the foundation.
I don't think the car show makes the foundation any money. Very little. So
My
we
recom-
gotta work
It's
that
getting
out.
better. It's getting better. Yes. As your representative on the foundation.
My recommendation would be we went through the eye of the needle on this one, and this was a tough nut to crack, and it was problematic the way historically it's been implemented, where some people paid and other people didn't, and frankly, it wasn't the cleanest process, and it's difficult, I know, to charge people like the foundation, to charge the Begonia Festival. These are programs that are near and dear to my heart, as well as I know the council members. I think that, as Councilmember Termini pointed out, I think, in my mind, the best way to deal with it is to treat everybody the same on the entertainment permit size. If the cause itself is good enough, make a budget allocation to the cause itself. That, I think, is the cleanest way. I think waiving the fees for some folks, not others, is a slippery slope, and at this point, we've crossed it, and I would recommend against going back.
Other items that people would like to discuss? Okay, I guess that's all on that item. Then we will adjourn as the City Council and reconvene as the successor agency to the former Capitola Redevelopment Agency. And do we need a roll call, or let's note that all the directors are here? And oral communications, are there any deletions to the agenda or additions to the agenda? Are there any public comments for us as the successor agency? Are there any staff comments? Then we have one item, consideration of approving the reorganized obligation payment schedule, the ROPS for July 1st, 2013 to December 31st, 2013.
I move approval of the ROPS.
Second.
Any discussion, questions, anything you want to
It
major?
should be noted that the library fund is a year ahead of schedule in funding with this, and that's always good news.
That's good. And when is their next meeting?
I think it's next week, next
Next
Friday.
week. Yes, next week.
Any other?
One, I think, very soon right after that, too. Isn't that our process, the 1-2 punch meeting?
No, not
Not this one?
Not this
time.
one.
That's just to
Nice.
approve the audits.
Ah, great.
Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Then, if we don't have any other business, we are adjourned, and thank you all very much. 7:30.
Woo-hoo. Wow.